great topic to get us started this evening, which is in the overlap of some concern of some concerns that the foundation has. On the one hand, the business of politics, economics, foreign policy, and on the other hand, the world of the arts and ideas. And in this panel, we'll be talking about cultural diplomacy, an area in which those two come together, sometimes come into conflict as well. So I'm very glad that I can be joined this evening by Her Excellency Sheikha Mayassa bint Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani of Qatar, Nicholas Yatromanolakis, the Deputy Culture Minister of Greece with responsibility for contemporary culture, and Tristram, the Director of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and with some experience in politics as a former member of the Labour Party and a Deputy Minister, Shadow Minister in Great Britain. So we've got a great panel who can talk about this on several levels. So what do we mean when we talk about cultural diplomacy? So I think that there's, on one level, you can see it as a way in which through accident or through design, countries accumulate soft power. We know that if someone knows and understands your culture, if they respect it, that oils the wheels of negotiation and it helps you as a nation to get your way in the world. It also brings economic benefits, it attracts tourism to you, it opens up export markets. But for countries themselves, there is a benefit, the sense that your country is known and respected and admired in the world. And so it's not just a matter for diplomats, it's a matter for everyone in terms of how their country is perceived. But culture can also be an area of dispute, and sometimes diplomats need to intervene to resolve disputes. Ideas about what is acceptable for artists to say varies from country to country and system to system, and channels of cultural exchange can be closed as easily as they are opened, as we've seen, for instance, with Russia lately, which is formerly a great cultural nation involved in all kinds of dialogue and interaction, which now is not the case. But I'd like to begin with you, Your Excellency, by talking about the experience of Qatar. I think in my living memory, I can think of no other country that has transformed its sense of itself as a cultural nation in the world as much as your own. And I would like you to, I mean, I've talked in the abstract about what some of the benefits of those might be, but in terms of for people living in Qatar and for the way Qatar is perceived abroad, how has that transformation brought real and tangible effects?
Thank you for your compliments. I hope that if you haven't been to Qatar that you would visit. And I also thank Achilles for his kind words and Mareva, who's here for all the hospitality that we've received since we've gotten here. But you asked me a very valid question given the importance of 2022 for Qatar, which is the first Arab nation to host the World Cup, and in November. That's made a lot of Europeans very upset because there's no summer games. But it allowed us to think about how we would prepare for the World Cup before the World Cup came to us. So when we won the bid in 2010, we started a program called the Years of Culture. And the attempt for the goal was to share Qatar's history and culture and heritage to the world and bring the world to Qatar. So we always timed the World Cup in 2014 with Brazil, 2018 with Russia, and 2026 we're probably going to look at Mexico and Canada. So the idea was to use this as a celebration and a vehicle to bring people together, to create these conversations and dialogues, and allow people to really understand who we are, and allow them to make their own judgments of what an Arab nation could be like and how they can experience it. And we have invested a lot in culture. And that was a decision that began way before my time. In the late 1990s, Qatar was actually financially in a very bad situation. And the country, at the time my father was the emir, and they decided to invest in culture, in education, and health as a way to invest in our human resources, which are number one priority. So we have a few museums in place, which I know you've visited most of them.
A few museums, you're being very modest, Your Excellency.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been a strategy of ours and will continue to do so, to empower people to express themselves and have a voice for themselves, to tell their own stories to the rest of the world.
I mean, you've spent billions in terms of building museums, art acquisitions, other sorts of cultural infrastructure. What kind of return does Qatar get for that spending?
Well, I can give you some examples. We have some living examples here. I have a few people from the museums. Reem Al-Thani, she's our director of exhibitions. She's exhibited major exhibitions with international curators and museum directors. I have Aisha Suwaidi, who is an artist herself. She's a designer. She's participated in the London Design Biennale. She just opened the Liwan Design Residencies. Yesterday, we launched the poster for the World Cup. It's designed by a Qatari, Buthain Al-Miftah. And she also just inaugurated a tapestry in France with the, I can't remember the name of the textile. It was one of the most important ones in France. So the results speak for themselves. We have fashion designers, we have filmmakers. At the recent Cannes Film Festival, we won 3 awards supported by the Doha Film Institute. The National Museum was an organic museum built in-house by local people, whether they're Qatari or residents. We depended on ourselves. It was much, much harder. But I think the outcome speaks for themselves. And everybody who's come through to Qatar has experienced an authentic experience. It's done based on demand. You know, when we opened our fire station, which is a conversion of an old fire station into an artisan residency, we realized there's a lot of demand for fashion and design. So then we opened our new incubator, M7, where we've had our Dior exhibition last year, and we're opening a Valentino exhibition end of this year. Next year, we have an exhibition on design by Vitra, as well as an exhibition on jewelry from around the world. But that came from a demand basis. There was a lot of applications to the fire station for fashion, for design and technology. So we created M7. And then we created Liwan. And our next priority will be the vocational school for the arts, because we know that the creative economy, according to the UN, will contribute about 2.25 billion. And it will create 30 million jobs for 15 to 29-year-olds. I'm a strong believer that skills today is going to be more important than a university degree for the future of our children. And if you find a passionate, skilled person willing to take on a career in the creative industry, we'll be here to support them.
Nicholas, I wonder if I could bring you in, because you're the Deputy Minister with responsibility for contemporary culture, and there seems to be a real drive from Greece at the moment to establish a position in the world where Greece is known as a place that excels in contemporary culture. We all know the Greece of antiquity, and in terms of building an image of yourself abroad, you don't need to do that work. That's been done before. But in terms of changing the way that people think about Greece, that's something that, if you want that to happen, that requires effort from the Greek government. You're obviously doing it with a lot fewer resources than are available to Qatar, which is a fantastically rich country from gas and from other sources.
We weren't always rich. Stop giving misconceptions. We became rich.
But I think it would be fair to say that that Greece isn't in the same position. And so in terms of accumulating the kind of cultural capital and soft power, how is your approach different from that of the Qataris?
Thank you for this question. It's actually very interesting. But first of all, I would like to also welcome everyone to Athens and here in Greece on behalf of the Ministry of Culture and the Greek government. Actually, the idea here was not just to do this to accumulate soft power. So I would take it one step back, and I would take it to your initial comments. And it's also about how you empower Greek people, Greek citizens today, how you foster creativity across the population, how you actually care about the cultural professionals of today. So it's not just about, adding something to the cultural mix so that if visitors come, they have more options. This actually is important, and we are making steps. And by the way, you're all invited today to the opening of 5 different shows of the Museum of Contemporary Art, just 2 blocks down from here. But it's not an end in itself. So actually, I was listening to Your Excellency, and it's interesting, different paths, same stories. So what is important to us is actually, again, skill building, broadening the definition of culture. So right now we also incorporate things like crafts and the creative industries in this mix, which was kind of like one of an orphan until now, at least in Greece. Trying to figure out how digitization will change the landscape. Of course, all of that, excuse me, will add value, will increase the clout, if you want, of Greece. Greece is a country that has been capitalizing on its culture for years in terms of, if you compare the size with the actual, strength of the country. But this is not enough. Oh, this is not. Some water. Can I?
This is yours.
Sorry.
Whilst you take a drink there, Tristan, maybe if I could bring you in, because we've heard from two representatives from government, but you run an institution, the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now, you don't take direction from government about what to do, but it's obviously an instrument of soft power for Britain in the world. It's involved in shaping a particular view of it. How do you, is this something you think about as a director in terms of how you change perceptions of your country through what you do?
Yes, and I think that's actually a strength. There are moments in the lifetimes of nations when the actions of their governments do not necessarily make them popular around the world. And at those stages, having cultural institutions which are not regarded as agents of government is very, very important. And so having independent trustees, having independent directors, having independent voice connected to those cultural institutions in a way which I would say is quite unique to Britain and probably America, is not the case in France or Germany, and recently in Poland we've seen a director lose their job. So having that autonomy in the long run, which is also around our universities, the BBC, the broadcaster, our artistic community, is really powerful. So that I think, as we also seen in other governments at other periods, that the trajectory of a democratically elected government and their public policy doesn't necessarily always impact the soft power of a nation, because actually those cultural institutions have enough identity and rhythm and autonomy within them to kind of keep an image of a nation separate and distinct. And I think that's an important part of our settlement in the UK. I think I'd say the other thing, which about sort of soft power and the role of institutions and museums, is that particularly in the shadow of the Acropolis, is the important work we have to do, whether in the UK or America or other parts of the world, of sustaining those democratic institutions and democratic culture and civil society within the country itself. Because I think there's fragility within our own countries at the same time as we're suggesting around the world that these are values and systems that other countries could look to. We have to make sure we're also supporting what we're doing in the UK.
I mean, you were talking a lot about using culture as a way to build your local population in terms of skills, but also in terms of these more civic things which Tristan was talking about. Actually, is that also a concern of yours here in Greece?
I agree. Actually, I think that also it's, and I think also the pandemic kind of showed the role that the state and democratic institutions can play and should play in the art world. And we saw other models, like, for example, the American one, which is not that much supported by the state, and the problems that created. So I think it is very important that you set up a framework. You kind of like set the rules and the ground rules. And this doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything is being operated by the state. That's not the point. But actually, I think this is one of the big differences in the last years, that the state was absent from at least the contemporary art scene of Greece. And so, thankfully, and we're very grateful that there are great private institutions and other organizations that can fill up this void. But is this enough? Should be that enough? And the answer, I think, for me is very clearly no. Because you need the state as an enabler. You also need the state to kind of also bring everyone together in a way that, unfortunately, nobody else can do this. I mean, this is a job, this is why states are designed, to do that. So you need that. And when it's absent, you feel the void and, the problems that this absence creates. Now, I don't know, I'm sure there are going to be more rounds, but just about, you mentioned also about diplomacy. And I mean, it's kind of difficult for me not to talk about kind of like, we're in the Acropolis Museum, not to talk about the elephant in the room or the elephant in the museum. So
I think that's the next session.
Is it? The elephant in the museum? Great. But it's also about sometimes issues, cultural issues, and these are emerging around the world. Things that have to do with patrimony, things that have to do with, the colonial past of several countries, or how certain things ended up in certain places. I'm trying to be super PC here. These are questions that are actually now blending in the broader discussion about, let's say, diplomacy and culture. So it's not just about, I'm gonna, see an Italian movie and be moved by it, and maybe then I'll travel to Venice. And it's not about, like buying a French, kind of a piece of fashion or something like that. It is becoming much more complex and complicated, and actually sometimes not a driver of diplomacy, but it can be also like an inhibitor.
Well, Tristan, you have some experience in this field as well, but not as a state actor. But I think we'll come on to the marbles in the next panel. But at the Victoria and Albert Museum, you have the Moqtada collection, a series of treasures which are from Ethiopia, which it's not really in your gift to give them back, because that's a matter for government and not for you as a museum director. But you have to deal with this. You still need to exercise diplomacy in balancing yourself between the government who provides you funding, between public opinion, between the interested parties from Ethiopia. And I wonder if you could tell us about how you go about achieving this kind of diplomatic balance between those forces when it's not really your decision to make about what happens to those.
I mean, I think museums and cultural institutions do have this ability to move in spaces where elected governments don't always have the capacity to do so. And actually, there's a beautiful example of the collaboration between the V&A and the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, in Qatar, around a very disputed colonial collection, which goes back to Clive of India and beautiful artifacts from the Mughal past, which entered the family collection there, which was then sold by the family, which was then purchased by Qatar, which was then put on loan at the V&A and is now... So you can have, through the histories of objects, which often have multiple and disputed pasts, you can actually build up these quite close and interesting relationships. Within that, in a sense, you want to mobilize governments at the right point. And where you have an engaged and active and considered embassy, it makes all the difference. And where you have governments that believe, as the Greek government and the Qatari government believe in the power and importance of culture, then you've got an opening. And so, in a sense, what you want to do, I think, as a museum director is fly beneath the radar as much as possible and build up those partnerships and relationships. Because in the long run, particularly for a country like the UK, with a complicated past, which is under a great deal of scrutiny at the moment, being open and receptive around the history of collections seems to me a really important part of the kind of relationships we want to build in the future.
And do you think that it can also be a way, in terms of that kind of honesty, or other senses in which a museum puts itself out into the world, do you think that can also be a way sometimes that Britain can excuse foreign policy mistakes, or can at least the kind of damage that would be done to another actor who didn't have the same reputation in the world can be lessened by... by those?
I don't think we're that sophisticated. In contrast to the French, I mean, the French are ruthless about this in a very brilliant way, and they utilize hard power and soft power, the sale of jets and the building of museums at the same time in a way which is absolutely remarkable. And actually, when we look at other, European nations and their strategic ability to use that, and so that works very well whilst it's working very well. But when it goes wrong, and were the reputation, for example, of France to fall in public affection, then suddenly those institutions and museums which are so closely affiliated to the state become problematic. Hopefully, and I think really here of the BBC or something like that, which is both British, but also I hope regarded as separate and distinct from the state. And that's important.
Your Excellency, in terms of when you spoke about the benefits that your sort of program of museum building, cultural development in Qatar brought, you spoke very much in terms of domestic terms and what it means for your people and for their future. But at the beginning of the program and actually throughout, do you think about how that's shifting the way that the rest of the world thinks about Qatar, or is that just a sort of secondary effect?
For us, the priority has always been domestic. There are other examples in the region that chose a different approach, but there's always going to be a domino effect. If you invest in your people and in projects in your own country, there will be a curiosity for people to want to learn about what you've done or how you've done it. We get a lot of countries now that come to us and ask us to consult them on how they should build their museums, because mainly with the successes of the...
I'm sorry.
It's okay. You need more water. I think he might need more water. Islamic Art Museum, and then especially with the National Museum. I think the innovation, we peaked in innovation with the National Museum. The combination of objects, video, with Jean Nouvel's interiors, that took us 10 years to figure out. And we were deeply criticized. We were delayed, opening, but we wanted to make sure that all the voices, Tristram was talking about how they're independent from government, but that's today. The Victoria and Albert are the names of the king and queen of England, so they created this museum to begin with, as they did with the collections. So yes, our government leads the vision. We have the national vision of which we are all aligned. But the local communities, whether they're Qataris or residents, are very much involved. For the National Museum, as an example, we held multiple workshops across all the subjects. Whether we agreed or disagreed, whether historically it was accurate or not, that was something we would evaluate later, consulting with professors from universities, with experts that are, whether in Qatar or not. And that was a process that we took. And the National Museum opening coincided with the launch of our Fashion Trust Arabia Awards. So we had a huge gathering of people in all disciplines, from fashion, art, design, architecture. And I know a lot of people who didn't accept the invitation later called and said, we want to come, we're missing out. So we'll come next time. This is an annual gathering, we have it every year. And we will continue to grow and develop organically. We're under no pressure of, competition. We don't look at what other people are doing in terms of, they're going to do something bigger or larger or whatever. We know our 25-year plan. We've achieved 17 years of that. And we recently announced our 2 future projects, which are the Art Mail and the Lusail Museum. Very distinctly different, but this will be our global outreach museum, if you like. If I look back to the 18 years that passed, I would probably categorize the first part as focusing on heritage and identity, because we looked at the Islamic Art Museum. We're a Muslim nation. We wanted to celebrate the whole of the Islamic world and make sure young generations know about the glories of different cities and empires within the Islamic world. We're opening an exhibition on Baghdad. We have some loans from the Benaki Museum in Greece. And that will open in October of this year. It will talk about 500 years of the Abbasid Empire. Then we have the National Museum and we have Mathaf. That confirmed our identity and heritage. We're Muslim, Arab, and Qatari. And now we open the Sports Museum, which is a sports and Olympic museum. We're in Athens, so it's when we did an exhibition in 2013, we had 800 loans from Greek museums. So we have now a reputation of trust, museums from all around the world are willing to let us loan our objects. And we've also acquired collections where we're willing to lend museums from all around the world.
And is that, I mean, we've said it's primarily for a domestic audience, but is that bringing tourists into the kingdom as well, and the benefits of that in terms of cultural dialogue and economic benefits?
For sure. Like, I can give you a different example of a project that I had no involvement in, which is the restoration of our old souk Waqif, which is called souk Waqif because the water used to come right in, and people used to stand, and merchants would sell their products. Waqif in Arabic means standing. And when we just renovated that, we got 2 million visitors. Because, people want authentic experiences. They don't want to go and see the same thing in different places. People are done with that. They want to experience new things. They want to experience nature, traditions. We've invested a lot in food and innovating our own cuisine to the ways that you can make them presentable to the world. We've had successful entrepreneurs opening their own restaurants. We're also working on a children's museum. I started that when I had no children, so I'm hoping to open it before my children are no longer children. It's been 15 years in the making, but we'll open the first part in the fall of this year, just before the World Cup. So we're really excited about that.
Nicholas, tourism is obviously incredibly important for the Greek economy. It's probably one of its most important industries. And we talked a bit about changing perceptions of what Greek culture is, but surely a lot of people come for the columns and for the ruins, and not so much perhaps for a kind of edgy, contemporary art. How do you propose to change that idea abroad about what Greece is?
I think that once people are here, they are able to discover more than they thought that they would meet.
In terms of bringing new people,
new people. First of all, we know that cultural tourism is a very important part of tourism globally. It's more than a third of that. It's cultural tourism, and also we've seen how different places around the world have actually invested in culture. Be it things like festivals that are being repeated, so they're being institutionalized, or like big destinations. And through culture, they actually attracted more and more people. So, for example, the Cannes Festival is a great example of that. Cannes, in itself, wasn't that attractive. No offense, but so the film kind of festival is what actually made it what it is. So, I think that changing the narrative is very important, and incorporating things in this narrative that are authentic. Again, I was listening to Your Excellency, and again, different paths, same story. I've been listening for a long time. Athens is the new Berlin. Hopefully nobody will say this during this conference or after that. So Athens is Athens, Berlin is Berlin. They're both wonderful cities. So sticking to who you are, not trying to paint a different picture, not trying to, hide the little, like satellite dish in the back and the little solar panels there, and trying to make a fake picture of what Athens is or what Greece is, and actually, say that this is Athens and it has this and it has the other, and, you can walk through it and you can explore it and you can listen to the noise and the sounds and the melodies, and you can smell the beautiful spices and the food that is being, cooked. But also you can, walk around and just explore that. And this word of mouth, studies, by the way, indicate that word of mouth is the most important tool that you can use to bring more people in. So, what do you need for that? One is this authentic experience, and the other one is better and improved services. So that is the other thing we're investing in, because someone can come once, but if this experience is not a positive one, then these people are not going to come again. And you want repetitive visitors, because these are the visitors that actually appreciate the place, they understand the place, they come to love the place. And this is actually the kind of relationships you want to build through tourism.
Ladies and gentlemen, in about 10 minutes, you will have the opportunity to ask some questions of your own. So do start thinking if you'd like to ask anything of the panelists. But we've been talking a lot about a lot of positive effects of cultural diplomacy. But there's also it's a two-way street, and cultural diplomacy can also be used as a means of punishment for a pariah state, or it can be used as a way to apply pressure on a state to achieve particular political ends. And I'm thinking of the most recent time that we've seen this happen in terms of Russia. Since it's invaded the Ukraine, its artists are not welcome in international forums. Future collaborations between institutions like museums have been cancelled. People have been disinvited from collaboratory bodies, etc. So Russia, which is a great and proud culture and a great exporter of its culture, is suddenly totally outside of the club, with the hope of achieving a political end in Ukraine. But that does also mean that we are all deprived of the great treasures of Russian culture that we don't get to see in museums or in cinemas or through its participation in film festivals. Etc. So it is a complicated, it's a complicated matter. But Tristan, I mean, do you think that the decision is the right one? That we say for the moment, we won't accept, we wouldn't accept a show made up of Russian loans, or we wouldn't have the Bolshoi to dance at the Royal Opera House, so long as it's active in Ukraine?
I think it's so difficult because we've wrestled with this question in some international fora that I belong to, where Russian colleagues were removed from the forum. And there was a debate about, are they invited as individual cultural leaders? Are they invited there as representatives of their museums? And it goes to my earlier point, how close are those museums as organs of the state? And you can see in certain Russian situations that some museums are very closely allied as sort of voices and vehicles of the state. So if you're there to sanction the state and criticize the state, you're going to move across all areas. If, God forbid, we had some terrible fascist government in Italy, would one necessarily think, as it were, the Uffizi should be banned, or the Vatican, well, different museums should be banned, and there that space between the state and the institutions becomes very, very important. I think that each case has to be addressed differently. We had an exhibition on Carl Fabergé, and actually Fabergé's workshop in London, in the UK, and we came under some pressure to cancel that exhibition and curtail it. And I felt very strongly we shouldn't, because the story of Carl Fabergé was, on the one hand, yes, an account of imperial Easter eggs and the Romanovs and Russia, but it was also the story of a cosmopolitan individual. It was the story of war and revolution and refugees, and all of those components we're now seeing play out in terms of the aftermath of the invasion. So I think you do have to address it institution by institution and issue by issue. And only today I saw, a Russian tennis player who had been banned for being Russian is now allowed to compete in one of the tennis competitions. And it also, in a sense, works the other way, which is that you get pressure, and we certainly can see this in some countries, whereby, as it were, states want to do something. And so it's easy for them to tell cultural institutions or sporting bodies or educational institutions to do things whilst they themselves can't necessarily make the difficult decisions. And there you see the kind of inverse of that state authority. I hope my political background has given me enough not to fully answer the question.
Well, perhaps we can ask another politician.
We're a proper politician.
Yeah. What about here in Greece? Is the culture ministry here putting pressure on organizations not to work with Russian partners?
First of all, as policymakers, you have to make tough decisions. What we tried to do here from the beginning was, first of all, to make a distinction between individuals and state entities. And there are also some practical issues involved in this. So I'll give you an example. A little known fact that I hope that gradually will make it a better known fact is that one of the largest Russian avant-garde collections in the world is actually in Greece, in Thessaloniki, is the Kostakis collection. So the Kostakis collection very regularly lends a lot of works to the Tretyakov in Moscow. So should I sign the paper during this war to
And is this
ship?
a state museum or a privately?
It's a state museum. It's a Greek state museum and a state Russian gallery.
Yeah.
So you have two state institutions. So should we sign, the piece of paper saying, yes, during this war, we will be lending you this paintings, we'll be lending these paintings to Tretyakov. And for me, the answer was clear, and it was, no, we shouldn't. But at the same time, we never blocked any Russian artist to perform, and that was very important to us. On the contrary, actually, we have this interesting effect that we've been actually talking a lot about Russian artists that are being persecuted by the current government in Russia. So they are also fleeing, the country. These are also other victims of the war. And the other thing we tried to do was, let's say, the positive, which is we felt that this is a terrific opportunity to showcase and highlight Ukrainian culture. So what we're doing is that for the last 100 plus days, because unfortunately this is how long the war has been going on, every week almost we have something to do here that has to do with Ukrainian culture. So we've organized the visits of Ukrainian refugees to the Contemporary Art Museum. We've shown Ukrainian films. We are now organizing a talk between Greek writers and Ukrainian writers. I met with the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Culture in Venice in the Biennale, and we're now organizing an exhibition about Greek, the Greek cultural past of Ukraine. So we're bringing awareness. We do concerts, and all the benefits go, to Ukrainian refugee children, things like that. So we try to do this, and at the same time, yes, let's say that the things that had to do with the Russian state institutions are being frozen.
Your Excellency, you've been on the other end of a sort of an action like this in terms of the blockade from your neighbors when all kinds of economic and social channels were closed, including cultural ones as well. And I wondered, what role did culture play in terms of what was it like being on the other end of that? But also, do you think that can also be a way to resolve a situation like this through making cultural links?
Yeah, I want to go back to your earlier point, because I think we've got to stop the double standards. Currently there's not just one war going on. There's more than a war in the world. And so I think that the beauty about art and the power of culture, that it brings people together. And for us during the blockade, there's a lot of artists that came out from it, and we expressed peacefully. They expressed peacefully their emotions of nationalism, and that wasn't just for Qataris, it was also the residents, and we are a multinational country. So I think the culture, if you just look in the room, you see people from different backgrounds, different incomes, different nationalities, and art is that platform that allows people to come in from all backgrounds and engage in a conversation. We never closed our doors on anyone. We're always open. We're always open to discuss with different artists from different countries, different beliefs, and we're always using our neutral platforms in our museums, because every museum we have has a temporary space in addition to other spaces that we have. And we try to celebrate the diversity of cultures. I mentioned the Year of Culture as a legacy for us for the World Cup. This year we're celebrating Mayassa, which is Middle East, North Africa, Southeast Asia. And we are celebrating so many different countries with music, dance, food, exhibitions. I mentioned the exhibition about Baghdad. We have an exhibition on Palestine with the Palestinian Museum. We have an exhibition on nomadic culture, because we're very proud of where we came from. And that will be at the National Museum, and that looks at North Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Gulf. We also have an exhibition on Al Jazeera, 25 years, because it covered so much news. It was, we made the BBC, reopened the BBC Arabic, because as soon as the BBC Arabic closed, we launched Al Jazeera Arabic, and now BBC Arabic is back online. So there's so much for us to celebrate in diversity. Arabs make up all faiths. You know, we're not just Muslims, and the largest Muslim country is not an Arab country, it's Indonesia. And next year we're celebrating Qatar, Indonesia. So we're excited with our variety of programs.
But in terms of achieving that rapprochement after the blockade, what role did culture play in that? Or was that simply a matter of old school diplomacy in terms of trade balances and, another?
So we as a government, we never, as our government, we didn't stop any artists from blockading countries to participate in any of our awards. Whether the Doha Film Institute with the grants that we give to filmmakers, or the Fashion Trust Arabia with our fashion grants, and we did get applicants actually. Some chose not to be fearful and came, others were fearful and did not come. But that didn't come from us. You know, we were always open for dialogue, and in our collections we represent all Gulf nations. In our whether it's the Islamic Art Museum, the National Museum, or the Mathaf Arab Museum of Modern Art. So I think you're asking the wrong person, because we're so open to people in terms of our nation. Like, I think Qatar is really a meeting point. If you want sports, you have the best sports events. If you want culture, you have variety. I mean, for me, my favorite festival you're mentioning, like traditional arts, is the Dao Festival, and that's Qatar, our culture village. They run that Dao Festival annually. This year they're going to run it for 1 month. Usually they run it for 10 days. And they're going to time it with the World Cup. And it talks about our tradition when men would go for months pearl diving, and it's the woman who took care of the household. It's the woman who fed the children, grazed the animals. So when people talk about women's rights today, it makes no sense to us, because we've always had rights as a community, as a culture, because Islam dictates that women has equal rights to men. So it's breaking these misconceptions. Like you said, Qatar is a rich country. I'm telling you, in the 90s, we were in a very bad financial situation. And it was a bold decision from my father at that time to invest in gas. Fast forward, 30 years, the whole world is looking for energy because of the current crisis that between Russia and Ukraine. So I think if you have a conviction and an intuition to do certain things, because you feel that this is the right thing for your country, then and you're in a position to do that, I think that's the best way forward. And I think people should continue to talk to each other even when it gets difficult.
So I suppose we've just got time for one more question. I'll ask that to you, Tristan. Do you think that cultural dialogue is going to be key in terms of resolving a sort of normalization of relations with Russia once the war in Ukraine comes to an end?
Well, I think the Sheikha's point about double standards is interesting and a challenge, because some within the International Forum of Museum Directors, where this conversation was taking place, sort of reflected upon American museums and the Iraq War, and whether there was any response to them and their role within that. And I think there does have to be a sort of richer appreciation of some of the kind of nuance surrounding that. I don't think culture will solve the problem of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I think hard power will stop that one way or another.
Probably got time for a couple of questions from the audience, if anyone has them. I think we've got hand mics around. Are there any? This gentleman here at the front.
Hello. Good evening. Your Excellency, Masa al-Khir. Good evening. Kalispera, Mr. Minister. I have a question for Tristan, if I may. It relates to the elephant in the room, so I'm sorry to put you in that place, but let's presume you weren't in charge of the V&A, but you were in charge of the British Museum. Or, if I may put it a different way, if you were hired as a consultant to give advice on what's the best way to get the Elgin marbles back home where they belong, how would you propose to achieve that? I know the complications between the Board of Trustees of the British Museum and that they're not really under the auspices of the British government. But perhaps if you become a Labour government yourself, you may have some influence. Sorry.
It is more likely that Lord Elgin himself would return here. Well, look, I don't want to preempt the next conversation, but what is clear is that it is not up to the trustees of the British Museum. There is a piece of legislation from 1963 which says that the trustees of the British Museum cannot deaccession items in their collection unless they are ruined beyond repair, an exact replica, go to another national museum in the UK, or will not be removed to the detriment of scholars and the public. And so the only way this changes is if there's political will to change the legislation to allow trustees to make the decision and have the autonomy over their collections. And my view, because I'm in the same situation, because the act that governs the Victoria and Albert Museum is based upon the act that governs the British Museum. And so my trustees are not allowed to deaccession any items from the collection. And that has to be a political decision. And so this has to be led by political actors who I think should give trustees the responsibility to say, yes, this should be in our collection, and you could make a very credible case, as Tiffany Jenkins will later, about why the Parthenon sculptures should be in London, but you should be honest and open about that, or you should say, no, we don't think they should be here for the following reasons, and we'll enter a conversation about restitution and repatriation. At the moment, trustees do not have the power to do that, so you have this ping-pong between government and trustees. But the law is clear. Trustees cannot do it, so you need to change the law. And I think it's important that trustees operate under the law. I think that's very important. So this needs to be a political decision.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, so we run the Pripiktea Photography Prize that is on sustainability. And a lot of times when we tour the exhibition, we go to a lot of countries around the world, and some of them have quite strict censorship laws. I won't point any out. If you look at our past exhibitions, you might guess which ones I'm talking about. And we oftentimes refuse to take out artists because it's 12 series per exhibition. And we refuse to take out the artists from the exhibition because we think that the story that the 12 are telling together will not tell the full story if the 12 are not there. So what would you do in the place of us if this, I guess this is for all of you, if you were touring this exhibition and you were asked to maybe remove one artist or remove one image from the exhibition?
Your Excellency, would you like to take
She was looking at me.
that
so
question? I feel this is a question for you.
She was just too polite to put me on the spot. Well, you know, censorship, is that the word you used? That's a matter of perception. You know, what you think is censorship, I don't think is censorship. And we're very clear with the artist and curator when we choose our exhibition. You can do this, but you can't do that. Matt, last year we had a Koons exhibition, and the first question he asked me is, why didn't you show the works that, you know, why did you censor some of the works? We didn't censor the works. We worked in collaboration with Maximiliano, the curator, who I believe has also curated this show, and Jeff, who's an old friend. And he said, listen, what we're interested in is to empower people with your works of art and let them know about different techniques and technologies you've used to accomplish these things. We're not interested to, you know, to get people to, you know, to create a negative impact or reaction, because that's not what art should be doing, in my opinion. We like to bring people together, we like to inform them and educate them. So if I know that that's your position and you feel very strongly about it, I probably wouldn't work with you. And if you respect my morals and values as a person who's in charge and responsible of bringing art from all around the world, and I was telling your deputy minister here, I first got introduced to contemporary Greek art in Germany at Documenta at Kassel. I didn't even realize how much diversity and, you know, great artists that Greece had. That was the first encounter. So it's a choice that you make as the, you know, owner of this project, whether you want to be flexible in taking works of art to different places. And many places, even in New York, I lived there for a while, there are some exhibitions that they asked pieces to be removed. So it's not just an Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern thing. It's a question of values that will govern your institution, and we're very, very strict about that.
Thank you. We're almost exactly on time. So there will be a 5-minute break now while we reset things, and then in the next panel we're going to come to the
Straight for the elephant.
To the elephant in the room. Thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you.